Well, we're talking about all this prophecy right now. And the prophecy is horrendous, and it could all happen. But we're also talking about hope, and we're talking about what is represented by that hope and coming together into oneness. And I get a little lost. I get a little lost in that, and I get a little lost in that because people want the positive, but they're getting delivered the negative, and maybe they really want the negative because that, sort of gets the juices going, and maybe you'll do something about it, and maybe the positive is a little too lazy, and somebody else can do it. And, I look at the positive and I look at the negative, and people wanting one or the other, or getting one or the other. And it's meaningless to me. And I know that's going to sound kind of weird, but there really isn't any positive or negative. It just is. It all just simply is. It's not a matter of what's really great or what's really violent. It all is. And it's rather, in my mind, a matter of what are you going to do with it? Whether it's positive or negative, what are you going to do with it? Are you just going to feel good because it's positive? And you're going to say your prayers? And you're going to think right because that keeps the positive going? Or are you going to go into depression and fear and trembling and anxiety and worry and jealousy because, oh my gosh, the world is falling? It's like all the little children's story. The world is going to fall on our heads. Prepare, prepare. I guess it's where I'm from and where I've been. I come from the reclaimed deserts of southern Idaho, and you learn as a youngster how to survive. That's survival. If you get sick, you learn how to take care of that illness. If you have a problem, you learn how to create a conclusion or an answer, or you learn how to go to your friends and ask for help. We all learn how to help each other because there's nobody else. There's no fail-safes. I was raised with that. There was no such thing as food stamps. If you're starving, you're starving. If you die, you die. You don't go running around. So we learn how to help each other. And people talk about September 11, but I've sort of been there. For me, it was Pearl Harbor. And I remember Pearl Harbor so clearly. It was like the neighbors and the friends and my loved ones were all crying and screaming. And, this can't be happening, this can't be happening. And Roosevelt, delivering his talk. And what followed on that, and the rationing. You couldn't just go to the store and buy butter. You couldn't buy sugar. You couldn't even buy sheets for your bed. Everything was rationed. And when we went to a grocery store, it wasn't like grocery stores are now. It was sort of like a combination of a few shelves with a few things on it, and the rest were tables and machinery whereby you brought in your produce from your victory garden, you canned it there, and you paid for the metal you used when you left. So you would buy what goods were already canned, then you would buy the metal that you used for the goods you canned, and that's where you paid at the checkout. So, that was me. That was my childhood. That was my life. And we all had the victory gardens, and nobody had much money. You learned how to live out of orange crates, and you made do. And it was okay. In fact, it was fun. It was a challenge because Um, you learned how to decorate, and you learned how to invent, and you learned how to create, and you learned how to make things, because you couldn't go to a store and buy it. You didn't have enough money, and nobody could really give it to you. You just shared or made it your own. You made your own way. And during those days, if anybody died in the war effort, they got this great big gold decal that they put, I mean, those are big things. They put them on their living room window as a sign for everybody else that they had lost a loved one in the war effort. Well, I had to walk from where I lived, that's Twin Falls, Idaho. I had to walk up Shoshone Street to where I went to school, Washington School. It no longer exists, but you know, it was a great school. I had to walk these long blocks to get there. The blocks in Twin Falls, Idaho were like the blocks in Washington, D.C. I mean, they were long blocks. They weren't short blocks. And of course, for a little kid, it's a long way. And they didn't bus children who lived in town then. I mean, you walked it. The buses were reserved for the country kids. You know, if you were unlucky enough not to live near your school, tough. So you walked it. I mean, nobody ever thought of driving their kids to school. I mean, nobody did that. So you're walking. And these many blocks to get to school, here's all these gold stars in people's windows. Well, kids aren't stupid. They know what's going on. I knew that meant death. Someone had died in that family. And this one morning, I was to the left on Shoshone walking toward the school, and I'd gone a couple of blocks, and this one house had 6 new gold stars overnight in their window. And I just stood there and sobbed. I just sobbed. I don't remember a single morning in my entire first grade experience when I didn't have to quiet my shudders and stop my sobs just to walk in the door of my classroom. That was how I lived in the first grade. And as a child, we would go sometimes to the library, the basement of the library, and that's where all the women gathered to roll bandages and make Q-tips for the soldiers. And I wasn't very good at making Q-tips, so they sort of kicked me out. So I was, peeking in all the doors and places in the library because I'm very curious, what's going on here, what's going on there, what do they store in there, what's behind that door. So I was always on this big adventure. But air raid drills, they were constant. And the air raid wardens would come knocking at your door, and you couldn't even have a match or a cigarette, any kind of light. You had to put it out immediately and you were fined. You could not have light. We're eating, you're preparing a meal, you wash the can like you do your dishes, and then you flatten the can and it goes to the major drive for metals, and everything is recycled. I walked a path of death every morning just to get to the first grade. People around here boo-hoo about the dangers their children faced. Well, we did too. And they were horrible, but yet you lived with it because that's the impulse, is to live. One of the outworkings of my childhood was making peace with gold. And I couldn't understand any teacher that would give a child a gold star for having done a good job on their paper, because that was death. Why would a teacher give a child death if they did a good job? It didn't make any sense to me. I had a big thing making peace with gold throughout my life. I couldn't even look at gold till I was in my 50s. I couldn't wear gold till I was in my 60s, because to me gold was death. So, and kids were always acting off. Kids were always hurting each other because very often there wasn't anybody there to discipline them. The men were gone. They were in the war. The only men that were home were old men or young men or men with something wrong with them. All the men were gone. So you often had rowdy kids, especially teenagers, and they would hurt each other. Yeah. I grew up knowing that the world was a very big place, and that what happened in other parts of the world affected me, and that there was no way I could divorce myself or separate myself from other parts of the world. Just to go to the movie house on Saturday and watch the kiddie movies with the cartoons, the news, we always got the news first, and then the cartoons, and then the movie. The news was always Hitler. It was always the war effort. It was always the soldiers dying in the field. I mean, to this day, I can see and hear Hitler, because we got him every Saturday morning when we went to see a movie. Here's Hitler, and the goose step, and, all these monsters. So I sort of grew up with monsters and angels. And and it's not that you can't tell them apart, but it's like they had their own place in the world. And we're going to defeat the Germans, and, we're going to rebuild Europe, and we're going to do all these things. But it's like when you solve a problem here, another problem pops up there. And people get more educated, and they become more prosperous, and they become more relaxed, and things are better at home. But they really aren't better. You turn that around, it's sort of like the man in the gray flannel suit. Remember that movie? It's like they're putting on airs to please the boss. Or they get home at night and everybody's cold, and the woman maybe drinks and is an alcoholic on the side, and the kids are told to be perfect, and things don't work out perfectly. And I would always see all of that. And of course I had a dad who was a police officer. I love that. He wasn't my biological father. I was raised by Norwegians in the reclaimed deserts of southern Idaho, so go figure that. That's another story. But this incredible man finally, I had 5 fathers and 2 mothers, wound up raising myself. Well, this incredible man finally won my mother's heart. It took me years to accept him. But he's the police officer, Kenneth L. Johnston. Fabulous man, but I was afraid of him at first. And one of the things he did to sort of instill more of that fear was he had this particular thing he would do. I really think the man wanted to raise the world's most perfect witness. So here's this little 9-year-old kid, and we're in downtown Main Street in Twin Falls, Idaho, and we go into the dime stores, Newberry's and Woolworth. And in those days, they didn't stack shelves. Everything is at eye level, and it's covered with glass. So you go in there, and I'm like any normal kid, agog at all the glitter, oh, look at all these pretty things. And it's always the same MO. Dad would grab me by the shoulders, twirl me around, look at me, eyeball to eyeball. All right, describe that man that just went by. Any color of the hair, is there in any part? Describe his eyes, were there any glasses? Any scars? Describe his face. Describe his clothes, was he wearing a belt or not? Describe his shoes, shoelaces. And, is there a watch? We had this checklist. And, here's Dad right in front of me, and it's demanding, strict, demanding that I describe this man. Well, I wasn't looking at the man, I was looking at the glitter. And it's just like, oh, And we would be trying to cross the street at the intersection of Main and Shoshone in downtown Twin Falls. We get partway across the street, and well, maybe make it to the other side, and Dad would, same MO, grab me by the shoulders, twirl me around, eyeball to eyeball. All right, now describe that woman that just went by, and here's a checklist. And he did that off and on for 3 years. I never knew when he was going to do it. So I went around staring at everything, and looking at everybody, and whoo, can I remember this, looking to see how are they walking, what do they look like, what's their shape, any distinguishing features, can I describe this person? Because, I had no idea when he was going to do this. And so couple that with having to go to the police station, if you're uptown and you miss the ride home, miss my school bus, I'd have to walk to the police station and go home when Dad had a coffee break. Or if Mom came into town and she was waiting to talk to Dad, we'd wait in the police station. So I was often in the police station, and I was often there for hours at a time, it seemed like, although I'm sure it wasn't that long. And I'm just this extremely curious person. So I would walk around and, checking to see if any of the detectives were watching. Okay, then I'd go into their office and rifle the files, read them. Ooh, isn't that interesting? Put everything back like I found it, leave. The interrogation rooms, the door was always closed, but in those days you had the big old skeleton key with the big old, keyhole. You could see right through. Well, that was just my size. So I'd look in and watch the interrogations, or I'd put my ear up there so I could hear everything. And one of the things I noticed with dozens, hundreds of people, just lots of people, invariably the victim would always say, I just knew when I opened that door something bad was going to happen. Or, I had a dream last night that I needed to stay away from this person. Or they would say, I just had this feeling I shouldn't have loaned that guy any money. Or they would say, I just had a feeling about that corner. I just should have stayed away from that corner. Well, in my very logical mind, I was hearing this and I was seeing it. And I was saying to myself, all adults are stupid. If they already knew it, why did they do it? So, all adults are stupid. I'm never going to be an adult when I grow up. That's it. Not going to do it. Well, I grew up, became stupid like all other adults are, and had to relearn everything. But, and my world was the deserts and the canyons, and I was, by the time I made it to, how far did I make it? 6th grade, I guess, in grade school. Because of all of the trauma at home, I just entered a time of rage, just utter rage. I hated everybody and hated everything. And I just raged. And I was stealing. I was a shoplifter. I was stealing. I was lying. I did everything I could to kill my younger sister. I didn't want a younger sister. My younger brother was okay, but not my younger sister. I was just one mixed up, enraged young woman or child. And there was just a bunch of things that happened all at once that helped me to begin to put things together again after they were over. And the first thing was, it was a Saturday morning, and I was all by myself, and I was looking in the bathroom mirror. There was nobody else in the house. I have a younger brother and a younger sister, not of the same father, but as far as I'm concerned, brother and sister. And I was looking in the mirror. I was looking at my face, and it was so filled with hate. And it was so twisted. And I looked at that face in the mirror. And I remember pointing at that face in the mirror and out loud saying, I'm going to change you. I don't know how, but I'm going to change you. Well, that's all you have to do is speak your word. The air hears. I mean, the spirits of the air. I mean, the air hears. God hears. Everything hears. And I was heard. And so things started to happen, one after another. You know, we need to be alert to the dynamics of the earth plane, because the earth is alive. The air is alive. Rocks are alive. Everything is alive. And if we speak our word, if we make our request, if we cry for help, you're going to get that help. It's going to be there. First thing that happened after that was, and I'm still just a kid. We lived outside of town on an acreage on the lip of Rock Creek Canyon that fed into the Snake River. And I was sitting on a log. Again, it was a Saturday afternoon. Isn't it interesting? Saturday afternoon. It was a Saturday afternoon, bright sun. I'm sitting on a log. I'm all by myself. I'm in the high pasture, wide awake. I mean, I wasn't the least bit sleepy. And suddenly, the energy matrix that holds the earth together began to rise from the dirt and the ground, began to rise as the mountain builds. It just rose and rose. You could see right through it. I mean, it was perfectly clear. And it's sort of like a peak, and I would imagine eyes, nose, and mouth, and hair, but they weren't there. I mean, it was just energy, just this sparkling, beautiful, luminous energy that rose. Lots of them, peaks all over everywhere. They were just rising everywhere. The energy of the earth, what holds the earth together, was rising. And I was just awestruck. And nobody ever spoke, but yet we had complete comprehension and communication with each other. I don't remember seeing any mouth at all, let alone a mouth that was moving. And I don't remember my mouth moving. But I remember hearing them as one hears sound, at the same level as sound, audio sound. And they called themselves spirit keepers. They were all spirit keepers. Their job was to keep or guard or be the stewards of that energy, that spirit that holds the rock together, that holds the tree together, that holds the earth together. They were the spirit keepers. And spirit keepers are everywhere throughout the world. You cannot be in a spot that doesn't have a spirit keeper. And I'm not talking angels here. I know the difference. No, these are spirit keepers. They're the actual substance of what we call spirit that holds manifestation together so that existence can exist. And I would come often then to be with them whenever I could. And they loved me. I mean, I wasn't shunted aside or ignored or made fun of. I mean, they loved me. They loved me unconditionally. And they were so wonderful. And they're the ones that taught me how to merge. They taught me how to merge right into a cliff and come out wherever it is I wanted to come out, go through a tree, go through a rock. They taught me how to hear and how to feel and how to see. And it was marvelous. It's just wonderful. And I could never get enough of nature and being outdoors because I could trust nature. I sort of need to go backwards here a little bit, back to the first grade, because that was such a traumatic year for me, before I go on, and say that I was the only child in class who could see numbers, hear color, or no, I heard numbers, saw music, and smelled color. Well, today we call that synesthesia, which is an elaboration or an acceleration of the limbic system in the brain. But in those days, nobody knew what to call that. And so in the first grade, and I also was dyslexic. I was born with dyslexia. Well, we didn't have gifted children classes then. You didn't have any of that. I mean, who ever heard of dyslexia, let alone synesthesia? So I was always punished in the first grade. I was constantly punished. And I spent most of the first grade on a tall stool in front of the class, halfway between the teacher's desk and where the door was to leave and come. And many times I would have to wear a tall conical hat that said dunce on it as an example of a bad child who told lies. So my first grade experience was, whenever I told the truth, I was punished. Whenever I told a lie, I was praised. So it took my concept of the earth world and people and adults and leaders and teachers and parents, and it just took all of that and turned it upside down. So the first grade to me was a nightmare, and it was a nightmare that just continued. So here I am now at this point where I'm looking in the mirror, enraged, and spoke my word, and then I meet the spirit keepers, and then two things happened, and I was flunking in school. And two things happened. One of them happened in English class, and one of them happened in math class. In English class, we were taught English by a French woman. Her name was Suzanne Dutoit. Taught English by a French woman. Well, go figure. And she had an interesting way of giving credit or applying grades. And that was to invite you to be creative and to come up with creative ways of expressing yourself. Well, I just got straight A's in that class. Then in math, I'd been flunking in math. And this was several years later. I'd been flunking in math. And I'd taken algebra, flunked algebra, so I was put back in remedial math for the 9th grade. And I had this wonderful teacher. His name is Max Sheen. I'll never forget him. He was a football coach, and he hated to teach math. So he's like a fish out of water. He's forced to teach math. So he had this very creative way of teaching math. He always gave a lot of extra credit. And he would give you a problem to solve. First one up to the desk with the right answer got an A+, second one got an A, third one got an A-, fourth one got a B+, and so forth and so on down the road. So it was always speed. You have to get that and run up to his desk. But the catch was that at any moment in time, he could call on you, and you had to stand up in front of the class and tell everybody how you got your answers. I got straight A+. Straight A+. And that magical day happened when he came over to my desk and said, "All right now, please stand and tell everybody how you get your answers." Oh, I said, well, I get together with this number, and we sort of join hands with that number, and we dance a little bit, and we sing a little bit, and we hop over the fence, and we get together with that number, and we kind of tell stories, and we joke around a little bit, and pops the answer. I would have loved to have had a camera. his jaw dropped, and his eyes got real big. And he said, and I'm quoting, "Oh, I never taught you that." But as long as you're getting the right answer, keep doing it. You see, he gave me permission to be myself. I could be myself in his class. And I continued to get straight A pluses because I didn't have to be anybody else. I could just be me. And there were a number of events like that that happened that were so earth-shaking to me. To me, April 1st was a biggie because that meant tricks. You know, April Fools. And my idea of a trick was always pull a trick on my teachers. And this one time I made this beautiful, beautiful package with beautiful, beautiful bows. And it had a get well card in it. And it sort of alerted the whole class to be in on this. So I got up and I presented it to the teacher. And I said, "Here's your wonderful gift for today. And be careful as you open it. It's very fragile." So she pulled out the get well card and she couldn't figure out a get well card. And she said, "Well, thank you very much, but a get well card?" So she very gingerly opened it up and inside was a loaded mousetrap. And one time I stacked up everything in the room, this is another class, on top of the teacher's desk, up to the ceiling, you know, books and wastebaskets and tables on top of her desk until it reached the ceiling. You know, fortunately she thought that was kind of clever. And another time, we had a ledge outside on the windows, and I was up on the second or third level of the school, the old Leary Junior High, and got out on the ledge and walked around as much as I could. You know, I thought that was really good. And one time, when was this? 7th grade, maybe, biology class, 6th grade biology class, or it must have been 7th or 8th grade biology class. Miss Munier, very strict woman, talked all of the class into walking out on her. So when she came to her room to teach that class period, there was nobody there. We were way over on the other side of the high school, or the school, and I left some kind of note, I forget what it was. So she got people to go out to find us, saying that if we didn't hurry back, everybody would be expelled. She was going to expel everybody for walking out on her. Well, everybody panicked when they heard the news and they went running back. And I was the last one in the room, and I walked up to her desk and I said, "This is blatantly unfair. If you're going to expel anybody, you have to expel me, because I'm the one that talked everybody out of I'm the one who talked everybody into leaving the room. So if you're going to expel anybody, you have to expel me and me alone. You have to leave all the rest of them alone because it wasn't their fault. It was my fault." I was always exquisitely honest, no matter what the punishment. You had to be fair. And in high school, I was part of the bunch that talked the entire high school out of leaving all of the classrooms. And we had a Stalag 17, or excuse me, Stalag 13, and we boycotted the class. We boycotted the entire school. Oh, I thought that was so fun. You know, if children today were to do what I did when I was a child, they would probably be sent to a reform school or drugged up. You know, in those days, creative children, you had a tussle with them, but they weren't condemned. They weren't cursed. They weren't cussed. They weren't mistreated. If you did a creative deed, you had a creative solution, i.e. punishment, but it would always match what you did. I never hurt anybody. I never destroyed any property, but I was always causing something. And that just sort of never ended. How did it all work when I was a youngster? I've been able to integrate that over the years and look back. It's been necessary that I do that. Because as a researcher of near-death states, how can you possibly understand death if you don't understand life? How can I research death states if I haven't researched my own life? If I don't understand my life, how can I ever understand my death? And in looking back, what was real, what wasn't real, how I responded or did not respond, how that was accepted or not accepted, I have problems with words like instinct and positive, negative, knowing, psychism, because for me it was all real at the same level. There wasn't a higher level or a lower level. And I hope you get a sense of that from my descriptions of Pearl Harbor and World War II and that kind of thing. God was as real to me as the wall, as the kickstool, as the pots and pans. The other side I could always see. So the idea that there was a curtain or a veil between this side and that side never existed for me. There was no difference between spirit and flesh. It was the same for me. And because it was the same for me, I didn't know how to communicate that to anybody. Because other people couldn't accept that it's all the same. Or that there could even be other levels or other frequencies to existence. They couldn't accept it. So I was always the odd one out. I was always the maverick. So my challenge was, not that it was or it wasn't, but how do you communicate it? How do you communicate it in such a way that other people can understand? That was a big one for me all of my life. And all of the things I did in Boise, Idaho, moved up to Boise, capital city of Idaho. All the things I did with the government and the various activities I had there, corporations, banking, so forth and so on. It was always, how do you make this visible to everyone? I started Idaho's first nonprofit metaphysical corporation called Inner Form. We were very, very active, thousands and thousands of people, experiments, speakers, workshops. I'm talking big here. I'm not talking little. Started Northwest First Speaker Bureau, dedicated to mystical, metaphysical, spiritual, psychic kinds of things, altered states of consciousness. What is it? How does it work? Ran all kinds of experiments myself, local, regional, national. Taught all kinds of classes myself. I was deeply, deeply engaged in this. And when I first started Interform, I went around to all the major churches in the city of Boise and sat down with the ministers and said, this is what Interform is. Our job, as I see it, is that we bring in people knowledgeable about these different fields and avenues and branches of altered states of consciousness. They present, and we stage this in such a way that the general public can make up their own minds. I'm not doing any of this to insult or to in any way threaten organized religion or any of you people. This is not against the Bible. This is not to harm anybody in any way or mislead anybody. No way, no how. It's all above board. It's straight out. This is what it is. And people can make up their own minds. So, yeah, I got very involved with Brad Steiger and a whole bunch of people way back then. Oh, that's maybe 40 years ago now. And I mean, we really did things in a big way. And in looking back, I can say it was always service. It was always honesty. It was always decide for yourself. Don't be misled by books on a shelf, sensationalism, or anything else. Decide for yourself what is real and what isn't. Make up your own mind, but make up your mind based on fact, not fantasy. That was my dedication. My goodness, I was teaching out-of-body traveling for about a decade before I ever died. And meditation and all this kind of thing. I had reached a point in my own evolution where I could put a paperclip in my hand and ask it to roll over, and it would heat up and roll over. And I even did this in public, and then I got to thinking, now this is dumb, because if you do it in public, or if you even do it at all you're doing is enhancing your ego and making yourself look bigger and better, and this is really stupid. So I quit doing it, because it didn't make sense to me to do that. I had been a hypnotherapist specializing in past life regressions, incredible cases. And I finally hung up my shingle and decided it is now time to begin the inner journey, the spiritual journey to the core of my being, because there's more involved here and I can't quite touch it. So I withdrew from everything. And then I died. And I always had this feeling like, the old idea of when the student is ready, the teacher will come. I didn't think that. I was expecting a person. I got death instead. I died 3 times in 3 months in 1977. And each time I had a near-death experience, and each was different, but somehow progressive in the sense that one sort of somehow led into the next one. First one was caused by a miscarriage and extreme hemorrhaging. The second one 2 days later. That was January 2nd, 1977. Then January 4, 1977, a major thrombosis in the right thigh vein, which dislodged, followed by the worst case of phlebitis a specialist had ever heard of, let alone seen. And March 29, the body just gave up. No vital signs. To this day, we don't know for sure what killed me. And then later that fall, had 3 major relapses, one of which was adrenal failure. In September and October of that year, I was working with a blood pressure reading of 60/60, so, wasn't doing too well. How do you describe death? I lost everything. I lost everything. Everything. I didn't even recognize my own children when I came back. It's like, who are they? What's this idea of mother? What's a mother? What's this idea of a hand or an arm? What's that? leg, never heard of it. I was still on the other side, and it just, to re-enter this side was very, very difficult. And then to show you what I went through, some of the things I went through, I had to relearn everything. I didn't lose habits. Still had habits. And the memory of those habits, they were still there. Like, for instance, I could take a can of food. I knew that in that can was food. And to get at the food in the can, I had to open up the can with the can opener. So I'd open up the can, and if I wanted to heat it, I would get a pan, put it on top of the cupboard, and I would lift the can. I would pour the food into the pan. I would put the empty can down. Then I would take the food and I would put it on the burner, on the stove, and I would turn the dial, and it would get warm. And when it was warm enough, then I would turn the dial again and turn the stove off. Then I would lift up the pan and I'd put on a little hot pad and put it back on the cupboard. And then I would open up the cabinet and I would pull out a dish and I would just shut the cabinet door. I would put the dish down. I would lift up the pan. I would pour the food into the pan, put the pan down, and then I would look at the food in the dish and I would wonder, what's that for? Why did I just do that? I had no concept of eating. No concept of food. It just had no meaning. And in looking back, what I realized that I lost was the contextual level of all life. I lost all the context, all the meaning. I mean, I knew things existed and you had to do things, but I couldn't recognize it. It had no meaning. I lost all the contextual basis of life. Well, I'd been a prize-winning cook, put myself back in the beginning cooking. I'd raised 3 kids, put myself back in the beginning homemaking, me and the kids, been an astrologer for a decade, put myself back in beginning astrology. I took everything all over again. Exercises, constant exercises. When it was all over, well, you know, my body wouldn't function right or anything. And I had to relearn crawling and standing and running and walking and climbing stairs. And, you know, people talk about their angels in heaven, all this kind of stuff, and how wonderful it is on the other side. And to me, that moment of heaven was when I could run a whole city block and I didn't fall and there was no pain. And that was heaven. That was just absolutely heaven. And all these fireworks kept going off. I could see thoughts. I could hear thoughts. My whole world just changed so radically. One of the things I did for my boss in the bank, I was in the analytical department of the bank, and one of the things I did for my boss was I was walking a bunch of papers to the headquarters, the world headquarters of Boise Cascade, which wasn't that far from where I was working. Idaho, First National Bank. It's now West One, but that's what it was called then. So I walked over, and the Boise Cascade building is a whole block. And all of the offices are on the outer part of the building, and the central part of the building is all air. You know, it's completely open, and like gardens and trees, and a beautiful place. And there's the 4 elevators are in the very middle, and they're like, and there's these walkways. I don't know if they're lucite or what, but you can see through them. There's these walkways that go from the office space to the elevators. And so I was on maybe the 3rd floor. You know, I made my delivery. I was walking back to the elevator, and here comes this woman from the opposite way, also headed for the elevator. And she was gorgeous. She was just beautiful. I mean, she was like a model, like a movie star. One of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen. I was just captured. And then I could see thought forms, and I could see all this thought forms. It's this dirty bathroom all around her. It's the dirtiest bathroom I've ever seen. And I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I finally just walked right up to this woman out loud in her face and said to her, "Don't you ever clean your bathroom?" And she got very huffy. She just straightened up and got huffy, and she said, well, I just haven't had time, and besides, it's none of your business. And she stalked off. And that was so funny. And I was leaning over the railing on that walkway, and I was just laughing and laughing, and because it was so funny. And then I was slapping my face, saying, you have no right to do that. I've invaded her privacy. That's a no-no. And then I just laughed some more because it was just so funny. But that was my world, and I just had to sort of reinvent my world and learn how to live again. And then had a future memory episode where I was living the future before it occurred. No, I wasn't a vision. No, it wasn't clairvoyance. I was living it. I wrote a book called Future Memory. I was living the future before it occurred, in detail, minutely. And left Idaho, came to the Washington, D.C. area because I was already living here. So I decided, well, I might as well bring my body along. So I came over here, and that's where I began my research, was here in the East. And my choice, my guidance, my feeling, my thought, my desire was to be a blank slate on which other people could write their experiences. So I took all of mine and put them on a shelf somewhere so that they would not interfere with what I saw and heard, the testimony I was given, the studies I did of these people. Because, my dad, he taught me how to observe. I was an observer. In that police car, he'd be taking me home. My job was to be silent and to be invisible. Because if there was a call, he'd have to answer the call. And here's this kid in the car. And, the cop car windshield was my TV screen. And so I viewed life, all of life, muggings, beatings, attempted murder, drugs, all of that. I was there. I was witness to that. But I had to be invisible. So all I could do was watch and study people. Well, if they said this word or this string of words, what effect would that have on them and the other people around? What would it do to the muscles of the body? How would they move? What would they do? What effect would words have on people or other deeds? Or what if somebody else came over? Or if my dad was there with a gun, did that make any difference? And I would just study and study and study people. I'd study their eyes and their muscles and their, what are the arms doing? What are the shoulders doing? What is the head and the hips doing and all this stuff? So when I was doing my research on near-death states, I was doing the same thing. You always ask open-ended questions, always. Dad always said, they're given accident, maybe 4 different people saw the accident. You can't go up to these people and say car, you can't say accident, you can't say anything. Except, well, did you see anything? Now, if they said I saw an accident or cars or crash, then you could use that word. But you could never use language in advance of the individual. So that's how I did my research. Never did I say, describe your experience to me. It's always open-ended. Did anything happen? Oh, well, tell me about it. Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. Would you describe that for me? Describe it a little bit more. And I'm always watching. What are they doing while I'm talking to them? If anybody walks by, does that have any effect on their tone, their words, their body? Does it make any difference if it's a woman asking questions? If it makes a difference, what kind of difference does it make? And whenever I could, I'd get into the homes and talk to the significant others, have the same kind of sessions. What's your opinion? What's your idea? What's your, tell me what you think here. And we, the neighbors, healthcare givers, the boss, co-workers. That's how I did my research.